Hello, everybody, and welcome to the NAESP Principal Podcast. I am Liz Garden, one of the fellows for the Center for Innovative Leadership with NAESP, and I am joined with my good buddy Scott Mcleod, and we're very excited to bring. And I should have asked him how to pronounce his last name, but he will definitely be able to introduce himself. But we have Eric Chagala. Did I do
Close.
okay? Oh man, okay. And Eric is coming to us from the VISTA Innovation and Design Academy. And so we are going to just have a conversation, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about your school, Eric. So actually, I'm just going to have you start off by having you tell us a little bit about your school, where you're located, what's your community like, who are the students and families that you serve, and what is your learning model?
All right. Sounds great. Thank you. So our school is the VISTA Innovation Design Academy, but that's like the name we'd never go by. We always go by VIDA because the word vida in Spanish translates to life. And so we're a school transformation story. And one of the things that we wanted in the transformation is for this to be more about the lives of the kids here than just school. And then like on a parallel path, like same for the adults also, that this be more about our lives, and we don't just go to a place, we're a person at a place, like we are who we are wherever we show up. So we're located in a place called Vista, California. We're about 30 miles north of downtown San Diego. And so we're in the border region, primarily the metropolitan border region of Tijuana with Mexico. And our families, we're about 58% free and reduced lunch. So below the poverty line. And where we're situated is an interesting place because we're a mile from the jail for all of northern San Diego, and we share a fence line with the School for Expelled Youth for all of North San Diego. So that just sort of like plops you down right where we're at, who we're serving.
Nice.
Oh, and our learning model. So we are it's a little weird where we call it design-based learning. And so we've taken the design thinking model and we've infused that on top of the pedagogical framework of project-based learning. And that is our model for learning with kids.
Nice. Eric, thank you so much. So I had a phenomenal visit to your school last spring. I had so much fun hanging out with you and your educators and your students. One of the things I'd love for you to talk about for a few minutes is how do you think about the learning tasks that your students engage in and why? And I think a lot of people would look at your very diverse, often marginalized student population and say those students need to be focusing on basic knowledge and skills, not doing all of this project and inquiry-based learning and STEM stuff. So talk to us a little bit more about all that.
Yes. And to those people who would say such ridiculous things, I would say, why are you saying that? And what in your mind is the best delivery option in order for those basic things to come about? So like I mentioned before, we're a school transformation story. We were Washington Middle School. I was brought in February 13th, 2013 to help lead the transformation effort from one to the other schools. And I was the third principal that year. I was the sixth principal in 7 years. All people who wanted to focus in on the basics, provide more interventions for kids, do all the things, and all of it was from administrative leadership standpoint, a fail, 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 fail. They insisted on continually doing the things that had traditionally failed vulnerable populations, students from poverty. The population of Washington Middle School is about 98% Latinx and 98% poverty at the same rate. And so when we came in with the opportunity to design a school we want our own kids to go to, and using that lens and this idea of VIDA and it being more about the lives of the kids than just school, one of the things that we did was we used the design thinking process, and this is why we turn it into pedagogy, to actually find out like what was the experience for youth in the school, talking to kids in the school, talking to alumni, talking to moms, talking to people in the community. And what we found, and then this is like 11 years ago, so it's not like rocket science right now, but poor Latinx youth didn't see themselves in what was being done to them by a white middle class system in the school. And so we turned around and we decided, based on all the coded language and all the information that we had taken from observations and interviews and inputs, and we decided that engagement was going to become the first intervention for our kids. And so they actually had to care about school. They had to see themselves in what was happening at school. At the former school that we transformed out of, they'd actually added an extra period in the day in name to add elective options for kids because everyone was in interventions, but really it turned out just provide another place for more interventions for people. And so we do the ones that we're bound to do, the interventions we're bound to do by law, and the rest of the time we're setting up great opportunities, great experiences, and really instilling hope and voice and choice and opportunity for kids, all of them.
So, Eric, I'm going to ask you, we're going to ask you in a minute to go in a little more detail about some of the things that your students do. Maybe now's a great time to sort of talk about how do you all balance sort of those state and accountability mandates with the more divergent, deeper learning work that you do there with your students? Because that seems to be a holdup for a lot of systems, right? Is that they're like, well, this all sounds good in theory, but we have that test that we have to pay attention to. We have those curriculum standards that we have to, pay attention to, and so on. So how do you balance that in a school like yours?
Yeah, so I very simply, I think people overthink things in a lot of cases. There is no reason that deeper learning approaches don't actually give kids the skills for which they actually need. We do not spend any time test prepping kids. We don't do any of that stuff. There's a test. We have to take the test. It's required. And so we take it, and that's about it. We focus on what is building up good, strong humans. We spend a lot of time with corporate partners and industry partners looking at trying to understand and unravel how you really prepare kids for the future work. So what I find when we have about 1,000 people a year come through on tours and visits, and the people who get hung up on things like the test scores also seem to be the people who like to throw around a lot of buzzwords, and they like to talk about creativity, and they like to talk about innovation, and they like to talk about equity, and they like to talk about trust and culture, but yet they can't point to any actual real examples of what that is or what they mean by it. So they play the game of the system, and the system has set up to sort of reward people for playing that game. And I frankly don't give a crap about the system or the game. I care about kids, care about the families in our community, and our teachers care about the families in our community. And we've sort of made a gentleman's agreement, so to speak, that we're going to worry about kids. A measure of success, there's a few, they're different for us. As we know, one of the indicators for college admissions, especially in California, where the public universities, UC and CSU, have gone test optional or not even looking at SAT, ACTs. So GPA is a big deal. What have you done in your community is a big deal. So we track freshman GPAs to see how they're doing at that level when they leave us. We open up opportunities and experiences for kids so that they can not just reflect on what they've done, because all schools have kids do reflections, and we grade it, put it in the grade book, and never crumple it up, never talk about it again. But really, when we want kids to leave, we want them to know, like, I did something. And because I did something, what can I do? And it's this simple switch in the idea of reflection that, working with our industry partners, has really helped us find the key to how kids will find themselves aspirationally in a future for which none of us can really predict.
Oh my gosh. Okay, you are speaking my language, and I want to get on a plane from Massachusetts to California right now. But so, like, my question is, so you've been there 10 years, which is awesome to be able to, have that length of time with a leader to really, drive all this hard work. I mean, I'm still going back on you saying the line about, engagement is our intervention, and that's just like brilliant. So what are some of the coolest things that you have seen your students and teachers do there? I want to hear about some awesome stuff.
It's right now, today, our robotics, we used to have a robotics team. Lots of people have robotics teams. That's not special. We actually got rid of the robotics team because the kids wanted to do something different that they were actually more interested in. And so our robotics program now is currently working on an AI-enabled robot. And so they've 3D scanned the face of one of the most popular teachers on campus, and they're 3D printing all the different pieces on a big, not just like a little maker bot, but like big 3D printer. And they're doing all the code, like they're actually doing stuff that matters in life. And none of what they're doing will show up on the state test, but there's not an adult that comes through that can really understand what they're doing. We have a class, it's called VR NFT art design. So the kids are using virtual reality as a blanket space for creating art. And the goal has been, and there's some difficulties with this with public school and money and stuff, but to create NFTs, which are non-fungible tokens, and then to sell them on the blockchain and like get into that type of technology and that those access points, things that aren't really being, I've never seen that mentioned in Teacher Magazine, whatever Teacher Magazine exists these days.
Awesome.
All of our kids are formally trained in public speaking, which I think is a gift. It's brilliant. It's not just for kids in a certain elective. It's not just for drama kids, but it includes our ELD students. It includes our students with disabilities. Every single kid gets it because we know the value and the importance of public speaking especially in the new, I mean, it's important today, but it's even increasingly important. And there's a lot of flawed attempts and words around teaching things like public speaking in public schools, which aren't really actual efforts at doing it. So it's not good enough for a kid when they, if they go to junior college or whatever to take a communications 101 and learn how to do it. What about the kids that aren't going to college, but yet they still need to confidently communicate their ideas to a team? So we ensure every single kid is and student is trained formally in that. So I would say those are just some. We have an incubator, a student business incubator on campus. So a lot of schools are like, oh, we have a student business and we do this, and we did that for a long time, but we evolved out of it. We evolved out of it because of partnerships with Otter Cares. So over in Fort Collins, and so I'm looking at you, Scott. You're sort of your neck of the woods up from Denver. Otter Cares is the charity arm of Otter Box, and they've helped us grow our entrepreneurship program. So we have a class, it's called the Incubator, where kids who either have a business or want to have a business are able to go and build it out. We don't have a curriculum for the class, but they're provided with tools, resources, money, experience, and a loving adult who has experience in business to help them. And another thing we find a lot, especially when families come through on tours, is, oh, my kid has a business. Great. You can afford to help your kid with that. But what about the kid who has a genius idea and doesn't have the wherewithal or the resources at home? We provide that here. You can do that here. Anything you want is possible because you came to this place, and we're going to help you sort of ingrain with the brain work on your mind of how you open any potential door to your future because you were here.
I so appreciate the emphasis on both possibility, but also building kids' capacity and efficacy. And I think that's really coming through really strongly here, Eric. Could you talk about the flip side of all this? What are some of the challenges and barriers that you and your school face as you and your educators try to do this work?
I would say the biggest barrier is the same barrier that every single principal and every single teaching team in the United States faces: time. And so our student days are 180 in California. Our teachers have 185 days. And, some of that's like just getting your classroom ready. We leverage, we lean on, we rely on people wanting to give up part of their summers or their evenings to work collaboratively, to do things. And that's easier for some people than others. So I think time is the biggest. I think as a system, so to speak, of public education in America, we need to crack that code, and we need to invest in a profession which is actually a profession, so that people have the time to do the things that we hope and expect for all kids.
Awesome. And I want to remind people too that because as I was listening to some of those cool things that you were talking about, I want to remind everybody that we're talking to somebody who is in a middle school, right? And I think a lot of the things you were describing, I've seen high schools aspire to do, and you're doing this with middle schoolers. So to make sure that people are aware of that, which is amazing. And it's a public middle school. Thank you. Yes.
With the teacher.
So with, yep.
Yeah, because people are like, oh, well, you must be exempt from this or that. Nope. And I think an important note, a reason, like our building is literally like, there's a hole in the roof from rain right next to me. Like it's not, Scott's been here. There's nothing magical about the building. It's the people. And the reason, one of the things that people like when they come to San Diego, they'll visit some key places. We're one of those key places. And they like it because when we talk about our school transformation story, we didn't start from scratch. It was a technically on paper, a failed school based on test scores and discipline. And in the same building with the same kids matriculating through and the same faculty and staff made it all happen. It wasn't it's not a standalone charter network. It's not a school that started up in a brand new building somewhere from scratch. So, the transformation work actually really can happen.
Yes. And so speaking of that, like, so we have a lot of school leaders listening to this podcast. What advice would you have for these leaders who are trying to do this deeper learning work, particularly in marginalized communities? And I would say, aside from wanting to bottle up all of your energy and your, just your passion for kids and like doing doing right by kids, what's your advice for school leaders?
I only have one piece of advice. Culture, 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 culture. And again, this goes back to the buzzword discussion that we had a little bit ago. There is not a leader, whether in the private sector or the public sector, that will say culture, trust, all these, that they don't matter. No one will say that, but our actions say what we actually really believe. And one of the hangups that I think we have from my coaching of other principals and work with schools across the country is we don't have a fundamental understanding as a cohort of people together of what organizational culture actually is, what it means, specifically applied towards the public school system and all the difficulties that we face. And so we divided up into different actual components. So a lot of people are like, well, we have happy hour, we do this, and that's fantastic. And there's a place for all that. We would refer to that as the relational element of organizational culture in a school. But there's like technical elements and there's organizational elements. And we're all trying to get to like some very prosperous fruit. So really taking time to break down and understand what culture means and how we tend to it. So the Latin word for culture is actually cultura. And so it's an agricultural term that refers to tending to and caring for, nurturing. And so it's time and labor intensive, but it's work of love. And I think that is the most important part. One of the things that we see, and I keep referencing tours and visitors because this is where we get our perspective for things that people are talking about, that informs our work. But there will be a lot of times on a tour where I will begin talking about culture and different aspects, and I'll get stopped. Sometimes it's an assistant principal who really wants to talk about the bell schedule or the master schedule, or the principal wants to know about course codes and like compliance with credentials. And so they try and stop, and like you can see the eyes of the teachers all darting back and forth, and then back to the host of, no, please talk about the culture aspect. So a lot of people don't understand even, an audit of their own culture and what's happening in their buildings, according to the people who are doing the work.
Thank you, Eric. I'd love to follow up on that real quick. You're defining culture in a very sort of robust and multifaceted way. But I think most school leaders would say, well, I also recognize the importance of culture, and I feel like we have a good culture in our school. I think what you're talking about is a little different, and at least part of that is not just the multiple facets, but also this idea that culture in the service of or the purpose of this, right? And your this is different from other people's this, right? Like we have a lot of schools who are focusing on culture around sort of like keeping, again, going back to accountability mandates and getting kids above the test and, making sure that we're doing basic proficiency knowledge and skills. And your this just seems bigger than all of that, right? Which means that your culture is aimed in a different direction, if that makes sense.
I think your definition is even a lot more, a lot larger than what a lot of people who come through. And again, not diminishing anyone, like everyone's brings principal, such a hard, lonely, isolating job, like hardest job. And when I talk about culture, it's not just the feel good stuff or the things we need to do, but like how is the institution built in order to get what you seek for kids? And that's obviously like a discussion and workshop upon workshop on its own. But yeah, something really heavy to think about. A lot of work and a lot of thought around it that anyone who reaches out, I'd love to chat about it, send that we work towards.
Yeah. You know, Liz and I are both technology nerds. And one of the things that we have talked about is that, you know, schools' technology usage follows the school's learning model, right? And I think what you're also talking about here is that school culture also follows the vision and the learning model. So it just keeps coming back to what is our vision for children? What are we trying to accomplish? Culture, tech, whatever, it all follows in service of that, right? And you're aiming in some different directions than most folks, which is awesome.
Well, I think one of the most powerful things too is Joe Bowler, so mathematics professor in education at Stanford. She is the one that turned us on to design thinking. And she was working with some of our math teachers and asked them, you know, in this change process, do you have any plans? Like, do you know what you're doing? We didn't. And they're like, well, we have some new principal, and A, who knows how long he's going to stick around? And B, we're not sure he has a clue. And so she suggested, you know, check out the D school at Stanford and this process they use. So we started tinkering with it just as an adult team. And what we found is that the nature of the creativity of the ideas that we were having amongst one another and the generation of an ideation was so great. But also what was really powerful is the connections we were building amongst each other and the trust that was naturally developing through it. So you think about design thinking, which, you know, 11 years ago, very few people were talking about. Now it's kind of everywhere. It's, you know, it's diffused to the point where it's lost some of its value because people will talk about it without understanding it. But if you think about ideation and the tips and tricks that go along with how you actually ideate and building on ideas and yes and going for quantity and starting with the worst idea possible so everyone feels safe contributing something, like the tips and tricks at each stage of the design thinking process is really the catalyst for building the culture, and the type of culture that I reference and that we talk about came from design thinking. And so you know, having a way to systematically actually think about these things. And the reason why we decided to infuse design thinking as essentially our pedagogy is because of what we found was happening between us. And we wanted to help bring that to kids. And it answered a call that we heard in our interviews and our ethnographic work with kids and families about what had been happening to them, and to try and get away from the patriarchy of we know best to what is it that you need and how do we serve you?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I hope everybody who is listening is gonna like go back and replay this several times, because there you are dropping some serious nuggets that people need to listen to. And you know, I still keep going back to just I love the I'm a word person, so I love, you know, talking about culture and the cultura and the tending and the needing to be tended to. Amazing. Anything else? I mean, I don't know what else you could share, but is there anything else that we left out that you want to, like, you know, this is your chance to like speak to the people that you want to share with other middle school principals, any other principal, school leaders?
I would just like just a shout out to all the school leaders. Again, not to harp on this, but that you're seen and that we know what a lonely, isolating job it can be. I'm very well connected and I feel alone and isolated at times. And so, you know, the more that we can do to build our networks of trust and genuinity with one another, I think the better. And maybe through NAESP that's happening, but it's just it's important. You do incredibly important work. The lifespan of the average principal in the United States is 3 years. The research suggests that principals don't get good at their job till year 5. because it's such a big, weighty job. And so when we have all this turnover, what are we doing? And principal tenure is quality. Principal tenure is directly correlated to quality teacher tenure and stability. And we know that quality teacher stability within a school is directly tied to all the outcomes that supposedly are important. But that's good learning though for kids. So I think we have a deficit with talking about principals, with caring about principals, with tending to the needs of principals. And if I had a magic wand, I would do something about it.
Eric, we can't thank you enough for your time today. VIDA is a real lighthouse for others around the country who really want to see what school can look like that might be a little different for young people. And so we just, appreciate your willingness to share and your school's willingness to, let so many visitors come see you on a regular basis. And, anybody who has ever visited you just walks away enthusiastic and can't stop thinking about all kinds of good stuff that they should be trying. And, you're just really a proof point for us. So we just really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
And I hope, so thank you for talking about, the lonely principal job and staying connected. So hopefully, if you're okay with it, we can drop in your contact information. So if anybody wants to reach out to you, that I know they would love to be able to connect, whether through social media or through, directly, that would be amazing. And speaking of connections, I want to just finish off this podcast by reminding everybody about the United Conference that is coming this summer in July. Very excited. It is combined NAESP and NASSP. So it's going to be big. It's going to be in Nashville. We have John Gordon is going to be one of the keynote speakers, as well as Rahima Ellis, who is the NBC News chief education correspondent. So, but besides keynote speakers and great sessions, and Scott and I are going to be there and all the other fellows, but the connections, like the connections that you have a chance to make at this conference with principals from across the country and actually other countries as well, I think is worth it to attend this conference, simply to be able to make those connections and keep those connections. So hopefully, if you haven't registered yet, you will go and register for the United Conference. It is July 15th, 16th, and 17th in Nashville, Tennessee. And that is it for this episode of the NASP Principal Podcast. Thanks for listening in, and have a great day.